Hello everyone. We are at webcast 2 for week 13 in a continuing series of webcasts on imported graphics. This webcast is focused on image resolution. I wanted to start out by just going over a few items about image resolution and the size of those files, which was a bit of a continuation from the previous webcast. Just because some students have had questions on these and had some problems, I'm hoping this will clarify a few of those questions. Everyone recognizes a photograph, and you're probably not going to have any difficulties knowing that this is a rasterized image. And this image was just taken with a Canon camera, and unless you are shooting RAW, most digital cameras save images as JPEG. That's just the default. And this image was 3.8 megabytes. The image to the right probably started out at a much higher resolution because I happen to know Patrick, and I know that he shoots with really good cameras and he shoots in RAW. But when he emailed something to one of these images, which I requested from him, I just love egrets, and I asked if he would send it to me at a higher resolution, he had sent it to me at even a lower resolution. So he took that camera raw image, he kept that image, he opened it up in Photoshop and made some edits to that. That's another file. Then he created a lower JPEG, a lower resolution JPEG image so that it would be smaller and easy to attach to an email. So what I get is a JPEG that's only 124.8 kilobytes, which isn't bad. That's, Gmail is practically unlimited at this point, but I know we're often sending images over 2 to 5 megabytes, where before we just could not even get things past a megabyte through email. And things are changing. We have a lot more cloud space to transfer images, so not all of us are that worried about the size. But a lot of these images can come in as 20 megabyte images, and that's not something you just want to send to somebody's cell phone as they're trying to download that much information. So in some respects, we still need to be careful about the size because maybe the output or the destination is going to be someone who does not want to use up that much data, bringing it down to a mobile device, or maybe it's not designed to even be sent to a printer and we just need something that's going to give us sufficient amount of resolution to see it. Now this is something that several people had trouble with. They would go look for a vector image online the way they were asked to, and this image was, I would say, I can almost guarantee that this image was created in a vector program. So it's listed in a vector area, but then when you download it, you find it's actually a JPEG. And this one is 262 kilobytes. And I know that because, not only because it's a JPEG, which a vector image would not be saved in a JPEG format, but if I zoom in here, I can see that I'm seeing pixels. And in a vector image, I wouldn't be able to see those pixels. So this has ended up being confusing to several people. So when you download what is supposedly a vector image, just zoom in really far on it, and you'll probably get a really good sense of whether that is a vector image or not. And you'll probably have to import it into InDesign first in order to see it. And that's a great way to just take a quick look at it, is to bring it into InDesign, zoom in, and see what the links panel says about it. Once you know which type of image it is, then you can go into Illustrator or Photoshop and make some modifications depending on, again, the format. This particular drawing on the right I think is one of the most deceiving ones because it was obviously drawn in or it was traced in a vector program, probably Illustrator. But if I go in and zoom, sure enough, this also has the jaggies, right? And in fact, it's because it was saved as a GIF file, and it's only 5 kilobytes, so it's an extremely small file. Now these are the ones that are so easy to take into Illustrator and have Illustrator trace them. And then you can use Live Paint to colorize them. It's just a great feature in Illustrator. And I've worked with some of you individually, but this is the type of image I'm always looking for to do a trace, where it's just black and white line art and Illustrator is able to distinguish these edges really well. And you can modify some of the settings, but then once you get it traced, it's just going to be really crisp and clean, and you can use it at any size that you want. Now we'll compare these two, which are, they look like vector images, but in fact they were rasterized. And we'll go down here, and this image was created in Illustrator, but it was saved out as a PDF. And that's because the PDF format is exactly the same format as Illustrator from a printer standpoint. And I hate to say that because it's really the code behind it. So when you save something as an Illustrator file, when you save it, it comes out as like a PDF for Illustrator. And you can open up a PDF in Illustrator, which is always really nice. Now we were seeing jaggies on this, right? And that's because any page layout program cannot reproduce the PostScript that we have coming from an Illustrator file. But what InDesign does is it has an on-screen interpreter that if we use display performance, high quality display, it kicks in and we get to see a much better representation of that Illustrator file. And this is going to be true for PDFs as well. I will often load PDFs into a document that I'm working on. And they're jaggy, and they look like the graphic is missing. Anyway, but the moment you put on high performance display, there you go. It's absolutely clean as a whistle. And if I zoom in, I can see these edges are extremely crisp. What we're seeing here with the black over the green is something the designer did on purpose. All right, let's move into resolution. So here we get into some more print facts. And again, I apologize for that because I always promise I'm never going to use slides, but this is just so much information. And a lot of it, as I mentioned in the previous webcast, I do not expect you to hold in your memory because it is very easy to look up, and inevitably it's going to have to be a verification from the print shop you're working with. But I just want you to have some sort of a background, in the back of your mind, that you're going to be able to have a better judgment when you go forward with a project. Because your job is to match the graphics resolution, and not necessarily always the minimum image resolution, but the appropriate resolution that are in line with the requirements of the output of the project. And I don't know if I can say this enough times, and I'm sure you're tired of me saying this over and over again, but there is a huge difference between a slideshow that no one's ever going to see in print versus a magazine cover. I mean, we're talking a phenomenal difference in resolution that's going to be required, color models, all the things that we've been discussing all semester. So you need to keep in mind what you're trying to do. And what I often do is I go for the highest resolution because sometimes I'm not sure how a client is going to use the document that I'm creating. In most cases we have a pretty good understanding, but they may decide to take something and put it out. Let's say I'm doing a product information page and it has images in it. I'm always going to include the highest resolution images I can if there's any chance it's going to go to print. They can always take that file, or they can always ask me to make a lower resolution PDF from that. And that's really the beauty of PDF, because as you know, we can create multiple versions of PDFs from the exact same InDesign file. So when you don't know, err in the area of too many pixels rather than too few. So let's just talk about some numbers now. Web and monitor output is 72 ppi and typically 96 ppi for Windows. 72 is typically for the Mac. A 72 pixels per inch graphic contains 1 pixel for each pixel displayed on the monitor at 100% size for the Mac. And it would be 96 ppi for Windows. And that's why everyone's always throwing around 72 ppi and 96 ppi when they're talking about screen captures and putting something up on the web that's only going to be seen on your website. Printer dots, on the other hand, are smaller than screen pixels. And there are a couple of different measurement systems for that. Now, though I'm going to go over this information, I'm finding that that line between DPI and PPI is becoming very thin with print shops now that they're doing a lot of digital printing. You know, I'll say, is that DPI or is that PPI? And I've had printers even say, for our purposes, it's the exact same thing. But I still want to go through and talk about why those acronyms are there. So now we're talking about printer dots, not screen pixels. Inkjet printing is measured in DPI, dots per inch, or SPI, which I never hear out in the industry, which is spots per inch. The number of dots produced in a single line of output. So for example, 1440 DPI, or on a grid, like 5760 by 1440. Now a print shop measures output in lines per inch, which is the number of halftone dots. And do you remember when we were going over the CMYK plates and you saw those little dots? Those dots are created through a halftone plate, which blocks out areas and leaves little dots, and then those are set at different angles. So lines per inch, which is the number of halftone dots produced in a horizontal or vertical linear inch. That means in 1 inch square, there are 133 by 133, which equals 17,689 locations for a halftone dot. And the problem is there is really no direct correlation between image resolution, which they'll usually require to be around 300 ppi, and printer resolution, which a particular Epson inkjet printer might have a resolution of 5760 by 1440. So we have to take some things just as generalizations unless we are working with an outside print shop and we need to get specifics in that case. The human eye can't really distinguish any better quality and resolution beyond about 1200 pixels per inch. All right, so why do you need to know about resolution when placing images into InDesign? For all the reasons I've talked about tonight in this webcast and in all of the webcasts previously, if you are creating something in InDesign that is going to contain graphics, you need to be sure that you have the appropriate resolution. And not so much as we know now from listening to the RGB versus CMYK webcast, you know, it's not as important at this point whether it starts out as RGB and CMYK as much as it is how do we get enough pixels in that image. And I know Photoshop can add pixels, and there are people I know who say they successfully increase pixels, but the best mode, the best practice is always to have enough pixels at the beginning and not have to have Photoshop try to put in those extra pixels to make that resolution higher. And the other reason is often you have rasterized clip art that needs to be scaled. And you need to be aware of when you scale that, what is going to be that effective pixels per inch. Because remember, if you're modifying the size of that graphic when you bring it into InDesign, it doesn't really matter what its actual PPI is, what that number says. It needs to be what the effective PPI is. So keep going back and looking at that links panel or the info panel. All right, here's a table that just has some general guidelines for you. An inkjet printer has a very large range, and that's due to improvements in inkjet market. Long time ago, it was really between about 150 to 200 pixels per inch. But today we're seeing inkjet printers that are moving very easily into the 240 to 300 pixels per inch. So these are newer models. Often our inexpensive printers are often moving into that range as well. So where I used to say, okay, 150 ppi is okay, and it can get by in a pinch. I've had to use 150 pixels per inch for newsletters with pictures that were taken by employees that didn't have a high enough setting on their camera. But if you can get a photo that is 300 pixels per inch, you're just better off. All right, a professional print shop. The rule of thumb is that you multiply the lines per inch by either 1.5 or 2. So for example, you're going to see tables, if you Google this, that say, okay, a newspaper, which is between 85 and 100 lines per inch. It's the lowest quality pretty much documentation out there other than people writing on flyers. And that's going to require about 170 to 200 pixels per inch. And you could actually probably get away with 150 pixels per inch. A magazine or a general commercial output, that's going to be any kind of brochure, a newsletter that's a more high quality newsletter. You're going to need something more in the range of 266 to 300 pixels per inch. But if you're talking about an art book, something that is really high quality, that's going to be sitting on a table where people are going to be looking at it, you have images that are large images, those images need to be a minimum of 300 pixels per inch, and it can go up from there. Line art should be around 600 ppi to 1200 ppi. And if you use a smaller ppi than is recommended, the output cannot be guaranteed to look nice, sharp, and clean. In fact, you're going to probably introduce some pixelation and some blurriness. Now here's the thing I want to really focus on right at the moment. If you're using a PDF workflow, which 95% of us are using these days, and you use a larger PPI than is recommended, what happens, right? So for example, when I went, let's go back to this picture of this dog here. When I look at that, its effective PPI, remember, was 1,263. So now what happens when I output that? Go down a little bit farther. All right? Remember that the reason you are sending me your homework assignments in most cases in smallest file size output, one of the big reasons is that it is going to downsample. It's going to throw pixels away so that it resamples, basically throws away what it does not need in order to get about 100 ppi. So even if, and several of you have actually sent me questions on this saying, wait a minute, you know, this is not looking as clean and as sharp as I know it did in InDesign. And the reason for that is because when you saved it out or you exported it as a PDF, it resampled, downsized the images to 100 ppi. And you probably had an image that might have been anywhere from 250 to 300 ppi. Whereas if you create a PDF with press quality, it's going to resample to 300 ppi. Now it can't do anything about those images that are not up to 300 ppi. All it means is that if you have an image that is over 300 ppi, it's going to throw those extra pixels away and resample, repurpose that image so that it looks the best that it can according to the algorithm that has been assigned to it to resample it. In InDesign, when you export to PDF, you do have the option of saying that you do not want it to resample. And you can keep those images at 826 ppi, but it's not going to really do anything for you. When a printer can only handle so many pixels per inch, it's not going to do anything with the extra pixels per inch. And a print shop's going to probably have a raster image processor that's going to process that and just take what it needs, and it's in its own way it's going to probably repurpose, or I shouldn't say repurpose, it's going to resample that image. So again, this is a moral after moral. It's the same one I keep repeating. I'm sounding like a broken record. When you are dealing with in-house printers, your inkjet, the school's inkjet, any type of digital printer, try to follow the guidelines that we've talked about in class. But the moment you go to a professional workshop or whether anything from a Kinko's to a really nice offset print house, such as Casey Printing in Monterey, you are going to want to make that phone call and just confirm what is it that they need, and then do everything you can to make sure that you're meeting that minimum quality that they're going to require in order to guarantee the quality of your piece. Okay. From here, I'm going to do a webcast on vector images. I'm going to do another one on rasterized images. And then at the end of the week, we are going to be going into a lot more depth in linking, which of course is one of my favorite panels. I bring this out all the time. So we'll be covering more detail about linking images, relinking images, and some of the bells and whistles inside of the links panel. Okay, until next time, signing off.